Welcome to this summary of Chapter 2, which is an introduction to the wonderful world of grammar. Here I would like to show you that grammar is not something that exists in isolation, but is in fact related to many different aspects of reality. This is what we will bring up in the audio lecture. The word grammar, grammar and meaning, grammar and function, grammar and style, grammar and region, grammar and change. Finally, we will look at grammar and language corpora, that is, large databases of text that can be used to find information about how a language is used. The word grammar can be used to talk about at least three things. Many people, I think, associate it first and foremost with a book describing a lot of rules for how a language can be used, and the studying of these rules in school. Secondly, grammar is used to refer to the grammatical system itself. Here we talk both about universal grammar, that is, a capacity of all people to actually learn a language, and a language-specific grammatical system, that is, how words are put together to phrases and sentences for communication in a certain language, such as English or Swedish. Thirdly, we can also use the word grammar to talk about a specific theory for explaining grammatical systems. For instance, we can distinguish between formal and functional grammar. In formal grammar, the focus is mainly on the form of the language, whereas in functional grammar, we focus on how grammar can be used to express different communicative functions. For the rest of the summary, we will concentrate on the idea of grammar as a system, and look briefly into a number of different areas related to grammar. Since this is a book about English grammar, the illustrations will be from the English grammatical system. First of all, let's look at an example showing that grammar is not just about form and grammatical rules. Grammar can be used to express different meanings. A. I could tell right away that this bad day was only going to get worse when we stopped to fill up at a Texaco station outside Hammond, Indiana. Here is a structure where the verb stopped is followed by a clause, sats in Swedish, including a so-called to infinitive, to fill up. Look now at a similar but slightly different example. B. I stopped filling up and went inside to talk to the cashier. Here, the verb stopped is instead followed by a verb in the ing form. One could imagine that such a small difference in grammatical structure would not result in a difference in meaning, but it does. Stop to fill up means stannade för att tanka, while stopped filling up means slutade tanka. This shows that grammar is indeed related to meaning. Here is another example of two similar but different grammatical constructions. A. Over the past 5 years, Dr. Stoll has been writing a book on biblical and psychological principles of life for Christian maturity. And B. Dr. Stoll has written a book that is years ahead of its time. The difference in meaning is that in the first sentence we know that Dr. Stoll has been writing, but we don't know if he has finished the book. In the second sentence, he has definitely completed his writing project. Again, a small difference in grammar, in this case has been writing versus has written, results in two different interpretations of the text. Grammar can also be used to express specific functions. An example of this is how different levels of politeness can be expressed with different grammatical forms. In this case, the present and the past tense form of the verb can. Can you help me please? Or could you help me please? Which form do you think is more polite? It is the past tense form could which is the more polite form for asking for a favor. A past tense form is considered less direct and thus more tentative and respectful. Another example of how grammar can be used to express specific functions is in the difference between active and passive constructions. If we compare the study was made by Dr. Gordon Hughes to Dr. Gordon Hughes made the study, we can conclude that the first construction, the passive, the study was made by X, sounds more impersonal and objective than X made the study. The passive is a grammatical form that we often find in academic texts, where the focus is on results, and where the person behind the results is in many cases of less importance. Grammar is also related to style. You have most certainly noted that language does not look the same in all contexts. For instance, you probably use your language in quite different ways if you're writing a job application or if you're texting a friend. This difference in language level is not just about the words we use, but also about grammatical forms. Look at the following extract from Bridget Jones's diary, a novel from the 1990s, where some of the text is written in diary form, that is, a very informal, personal style. Here we can find such things as omitted subjects, cannot face instead of I cannot face, and am fat, have spot on chin, and desire only to sit on cushion, instead of I am fat, etc. Another informal grammatical feature is the omission of articles, only thing instead of the only thing, thought of seeing instead of the thought of seeing, and so on. Let us now look at another text, this time from a doctoral dissertation on linguistics, that is, a much more formal piece of writing. Here we can observe such features as passive constructions, were carried out, were subclassified, were compared, used instead of active forms, I carried out, subclassified, compared. We can also see the use of a formal grammatical word, the subjunctive whether, used instead of the more informal if. I'm quite sure that you know about some language differences between different dialects in your own language, and also in English spoken in different parts of the world, such as Great Britain and the United States. Differences in pronunciation, spelling, and vocabulary are usually more prominent, but there are grammatical differences as well. English is spoken in so many parts of the world that it would be strange if it looked exactly the same everywhere. Sometimes we talk about three circles. One is the inner circle, where English is spoken as a first language, for instance, the USA and Australia. There is also the outer circle, former British colonies, where English is spoken as a second language, alongside one or more other languages, for instance, India and Nigeria. Finally, in the expanding circle, English is used in many contexts, although not an official language. Sweden is one of the countries in the expanding circle. Let us now look at an example of a text that includes several dialectal features. It comes from the American author Toni Morrison's novel Jazz. Here we find the structure most time instead of most of the time, a double negation, it wouldn't be no day, an omitted verb in you proposing instead of you are proposing, the form ain't, and an omitted subject instead of there aren't, and finally an omitted relative pronoun, you understand, instead of you who understand. All of these features are common in African American vernacular English. Another example of regional features is the difference in the use of articles in British and American English. Whereas in British English we usually say go to the hospital, in American English we would rather say go to hospital without the definite article before the noun. The form gotten instead of got is also more common in American English than in British English. Remember, however, that there are seldom absolute differences between regional varieties of English. Very often, one form is more common in one variety, but also exists in another. Language is a dynamic phenomenon, which means that it changes all the time. Some changes are quick. For instance, new words that are introduced into a language and either become very popular or disappear after a little while. Other changes take longer. Grammatical change can be quite slow, at least in written language. A new way of using grammar typically starts in informal spoken language and is then sometimes spread slowly to written language as well. Newspaper language is usually a faster genre than, for instance, academic writing, where changes take longer to be accepted. Therefore, it is usually a good idea to avoid new informal grammatical structures in a formal academic text. If we go further back in time, we can see that the language has changed a lot over the years. Here is the Lord's Prayer in 3 versions, from Old English to Early Modern English to present-day English. Features that have changed are, for instance, word order and the use of inflections, böjningar, in verbs and nouns. One interesting way of exploring how grammar is really used by people is to use a language corpus. A corpus is a large collection of texts, which can be both written and spoken. We can search for particular words and grammatical constructions to compare different region varieties, formal and informal texts, spoken and written language, and so on. We can also find out if a word, phrase, or grammatical construction is actually used in the way we think it is used. Here are some example lines from a corpus search for how the pronoun a great deal of is used in English. Analyzing the noun to the right of the phrase, we can conclude that a great deal of is used with uncountable nouns in English, whereas the corresponding Swedish phrase en hel del is also used a lot about plural nouns, as in en hel del böcker. I hope that this short summary of what grammar is and how it is related to the world we live in has made you interested in learning more. And remember that grammar is all around us, as expressed by this quote from a former student of mine who was working with his grammar course. I actually stumbled upon this grammatical error as I was trying to take a short break from the assignment. Clearly, it is impossible to take a break from grammar, since it does indeed exist all around us.